All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. Hope you are all safe and socially distanced at home. Welcome to the first community information session for Semiqua-Ella. My name is Lauren English. I'm the Director of Land Development with BC Housing. I want to welcome you to this public engagement kickoff for the site's comprehensive community planning process. Today, we will be providing you with a welcome and acknowledgement from Coquitlam First Nations Chief Hall, a background on Riverview's recent renaming to Semiqua-Ella, a 5-minute video, an overview of the site's history, planning process, opportunities for public involvement, as well as answering of your questions. Semiqua-Ella and Riverview hold the interest and passion of many. We welcome your enthusiasm. There are over 150 of you joining us today from across the country. To ensure the respectful involvement of all, we have established some engagement guidelines to oversee our interactions. Today's event is currently being recorded and will be posted online. A moderator will be overseeing the question and answer function. Any questions that are offensive or discriminatory in nature will be removed. You're welcome to review the questions as they are posed, and you can upvote them if you wish them to be prioritized and being answered. Any questions that we do not have a chance to get to will be responded to and posted online following the event. Zoom has a raise hand feature. Please do not use this. All audio is disabled and we will not be able to answer it. Lastly, if you are media, we ask that you identify yourself as such and direct any inquiries to BC Housing's media relations channels. Without much further ado, I would like to introduce Coquitlam First Nations Chief Ed Hall.
Thank you for that, Lauren. Aitsnat, Sepoial, Schaphelum Ed Hall, Tunish Quich, Tilitzen Ak Quiquicum Tomach, Ossium Tissiet, Eaton Alston, Machnetin, Me Sep, Quaquilum Tunish, Quiquicum BC Housing Meeting. Good evening, everyone. How are you all? Schaphelum is my traditional name. Ed Hall is my English given name. Honored friends, relatives, and visitors, welcome to the unceded lands of the Quiquicum people and to the KFN-BC Housing Kickoff. ISAPCA, thank you all. A little bit about our the history of the Quiquiclam people. As you can see on here, it's anglicized to Quiquitlam, but it's a translation to redfish up the river, and our core territory is right here and down at the lower reaches of the Coquitlam River and the hill of Semiqua-Ella / Riverview area, and we've had a long connectivity to this region for over 9,000 years. And these areas here in the lower reaches of the river, we've had a history of hunting, lots of fishing, as there was a famous fish run that used to come up here in the springtime at the cusp of the 1900s and earlier. And we've done a lot of gathering. As we know, there's gathering of different resources, berries and cedar bark stripping off of the trees, which does no harm to it. There's all sorts of medicinal type plants now. They grow at different elevations, right down to the sea level and up into the hills here, and then far up into the lake. So we've had a connection here to a very long time, and what it means to us is to be able to reconnect with these lands. We've jointly renamed and went back to a traditional name. Riverview is now known as Semiqua-Ella, and there are things on the website that will help guide people into the pronunciation, or if you see me around somewhere out in the public, I will be glad to assist in that. But the connection to the lands again has an importance to our past and today and going forward into our future. And these are very, very meaningful to our elders who have passed down a lot of our stories to us. And I would like to acknowledge that a lot of our history, you will not find it recorded in any books or anything like that, especially of the local Coast Salish First Nations here. And we are going to try and move forward in this master planning process with our Coquitlam members near and far, and with BC Housing. Jointly, we will be able to see what we can do with an area that's is definitely growing to address wellnesses and whatnot, younger people's journeys into a good wellness, and to the older adults and whatnot. And these are some of our goals, and to see if we can come up with some complementary type healings that'll go with that. So anyways, that's all I could share at the moment, and I will give the floor up to the co-hosts, and I want to thank you all.
Thank you, Chief Hall. For those of you that may not be familiar, BC Housing is a Crown corporation. We were established in 1967 with a mandate to develop, fund, and manage affordable housing across the province. Currently under the leadership of the Attorney General and the Minister responsible for housing, we respond to critical gaps in the housing continuum. This could include shelter spaces, emergency response spaces, rental assistance in the private market, or affordable home ownership. In any given year, we work with over 800 service providers and support 110,000 homes in the province. It is important to remember that most of what we see and know today as Riverview is a colonial development. Earlier this month, Coquitlam First Nation and BC Housing jointly renamed Riverview Simiqualala. This is in partnership as a step towards reconciliation and in moving forward in developing the lands together. This renaming marks a new era for Riverview. We know from archaeological finds on site that Simiqualala has a history as a place of refuge, food and medicine gathering, and settlement for Coquitlam First Nation. This artist's depiction of the land's pre-development helps us visualize the site's thousands of years of history. In imagining a new future for Simiqualala, it is important that we remind ourselves of the transformation the site has already embodied. This is our first known aerial of the lands from 1938. In reviewing it, we can see that the grounds were leveled and carefully manicured into a Victorian landscape. We know that the hospital's botanist drew inspiration from Kew Gardens in London and collected tree specimens from around the world to establish BC's first botanical garden. We see the development of what is now known as West, Center, and East Lawn, the Boys Industrial School, and the start of the Crease Clinic. The site functioned as a fully self-sustaining community at this time. Food was produced on site and from nearby Colony Farm, often utilizing patient labor. Housing was developed for staff, and a schoolhouse provided education for the children of staff. In the 1950s, Riverview Hospital was at its peak. It had nearly 5,000 patients. In comparison to the previous image, we see a number of ancillary developments on site, with a central laundry facility, the roadside Leaside Brookside buildings as nursing residences, and the development of North Lawn. Beginning in the 1970s, we can see adjacent neighborhood development start to edge closer to site. We see the Valley View 300 building developed where the Boys Industrial School used to be, and further north is the cemetery. What we now know today as Lougheed Highway can be seen and has maintained roughly the same location since this time. By the 1990s, the city of Coquitlam had experienced a building boom. Adjacent residential development completely surrounded the north, west, and southern edges of the property. Colony Farms agricultural operations officially stopped, and much of the site's highly manicured landscape began to change. In some areas, orchards and plantings were completely removed. In other areas, invasive species took over. And that brings us to today. Since BC Housing took management of the lands in 2015, the most significant changes have occurred in the north end in support of 2 new health developments. To celebrate today's exciting milestone in the site's evolution, we've created a video to capture the excitement of those involved. We welcome you to watch it now.
Ike Swale, Schapeel Medhol Tonasqueech, Talitznach, Queequaquam Tomach, me sap Helam Ia Queequaquam Tomach. Good day. My name is Ed Hall. Schapeel is my traditional name. I welcome you all to the unceded lands of the Queequaquam people. We have returned Riverview to its traditional Hunkaminam name, Semiqua-Ella, which means place of the great blue heron. Semiqua-Ella is an important part of our history and of our future. Semiqua-Ella is central in our core territory, lands that our people have occupied for millennia. In 2012, Queequaquam and BC Housing signed a protocol agreement that set out how we would work together. This agreement was an important first step in reconciliation with the province of BC and an important first step in our people reconnecting with Semiqua-Ella and healing from the past.
We've discussed the aspirations of the KFN for the site, both around economic development opportunities, returning land to the nation, and protection of the cultural features of the site. We're absolutely thrilled to be engaging in that partnership with the KFN and look forward to soliciting input from others who have an interest in the site.
Throughout this year, we will be actively engaging our membership with our own master planning process through meetings, focus groups, surveys, concurrently while BC Housing conducts their public master planning process.
We would really welcome the public's input into this next phase of the planning. And this next stage of the project's development, we're going to be creating a master plan for its future. So the master plan would be taking all of the goals and aspirations that we heard through the visioning process and creating a reality for its future. It's difficult to create a community without hearing from the community that surrounds it. And that's exactly what we're looking to do today.
There are so many amazing partners that can bring different perspectives, and it is a great opportunity to develop a community that's diverse, inclusive, accessible, and addresses the health, social, economic, and environmental needs and goals.
So I look forward to working closely with our Queequaquam First Nation. The river carries their name, our community carries their name. It will only work if we work with them.
Mental illness is incredibly common and is not and should not be regarded as a defining characteristic of people. I'm tremendously excited by the opportunity that the redevelopment of these lands presents.
Semiqua-Ella lands means a place where there's a lot of healing, there's a peace and tranquility there. It's just a beautiful spot to put oneself in and just take a breath and just look around and just enjoy the surroundings.
Riverview is a place to contemplate the healing that is available here in the site alone, but also the healing that is available in the future as we envision it.
By reconnecting with Semiqua-Ella, we hope to heal from the past and to work towards planning a future that respects our lands and the environment, honors our traditions as stewards of the lands, protects our culture and language, and benefits our people.
Let's work together, let's find common ground, let's identify the aspirations that everyone comes with, because I suspect that many of those aspirations are shared.
The visioning process was a critically important time to engage with thousands of British Columbians to hear their ideas for the site. Now we want to hear from the public what that actually looks like, how they feel about what buildings could potentially be saved, how they feel about what kind of trees could be maintained, and what kind of strategy we're going to employ to integrate the mental health community within that larger scale development.
I would invite all members of the public to participate with us and the Coquitlam First Nation around their ideas and input for the site. It's 244 acres and can provide for a full range of uses, right from mental health services to affordable housing, retention of some of the heritage, but also importantly, the cultural and environmental aspects of the site too. And so hearing a lot of voices, listening to those voices and incorporating their thoughts into what the overall master plan will look like, I think is really, really important.
Our elders have had no choice but to step forward and learn how to work with the people who are around us. That means teaching people on the outside about who we are. In our community, we have house posts. That means they represent families. They represent who the Coquitlam people are. And this post represents that. To tell everybody, we are the Coquitlam people. This is who we are. And we're coming home.
Thank you for that. That video is available on YouTube, and you're welcome to watch it after the event also. So where is Semigwalala? Semigwalala is located in the city of Coquitlam, adjacent to Port Coquitlam's municipal border, near Highway 1 and the Port Mann Bridge. The site is not far from the newly completed Evergreen SkyTrain and Coquitlam City Center. At a local level, Semigwalala is adjacent to the Riverview Heights and Ranch Park neighborhood in Coquitlam. Across the highway is Colony Farm Regional Park and the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital. Coquitlam's Nation lands are located near the mouth of the Coquitlam River and off Pitt River Road. I cannot emphasize the importance of Semigwalala's thousands of years of history enough. Since time immemorial, Coquitlam First Nation has claimed the land surrounding the Coquitlam River as their core and traditional territory. As Chief Hall spoke to, the nation's name translates to red fish up the river in Hunkaminam and signifies the important cultural ties the nation holds to the watershed. Semigwalala played an important role in the nation's history as a place of refuge during times of flood or war, as well as a place of gathering. The site is a place of high archaeological potential and protected under the Heritage Conservation Act. We know from archaeological finds on site that they tell an important story of the nation's usage on land. It is likely that through the site's 20th century development as a hospital, the grounds were disturbed and similar findings could have been made. Today, through our partnership, BC Housing and Coquitlam First Nation protect this important history through an archaeological protocol. This sets out culturally respectful means of disturbing grounds and works on site in an effort to maintain the history that we know is lying underneath. The lands were first purchased by the province in 1904 with the intention of being developed as the Hospital for the Mind at Mount Coquitlam. Over the years, the site has been known by many names. Shortly after opening, due to the confusion of the Mount Coquitlam naming, the site was quickly renamed Essendale. Essendale's first building, the Mail Chronic Wing, opened in 1913 and is now known as West Lawn. Essendale's development followed custodial approaches to mental health care with occupational therapy and limited grounds access for patients. Antipsychotic medications introduced in the 1950s led to changes in approaches to mental health care. As early as the 1960s, government began to examine closer to home mental health treatment, and societal reform saw calls for deinstitutionalization. The deinstitutionalization process started over 60 years ago. This included the creation of new community-based treatment centers and psychiatric units at regional hospitals. Between 1955 to 1975, Riverview's patient population reduced from nearly 5,000 to less than 2. A report called the Mental Health Initiative was adopted by government in 1990 and formally recommended the closure of Riverview Hospital. Riverview Hospital ceased operation in 2012. Around the same time, government directed the transfer of lands to BC Housing. From 2013 to 2015, BC Housing led a visioning process, and most recently, 2 new purpose-built mental health treatment facilities were developed on site. And thinking about the site today, it is most important to remember that it is not abandoned. This is contrary to a lot of popular belief that you will read in the media, on Reddit posts, on Instagram. Of the site's 69 buildings, 52 of them are still in active use. Due to its development as a self-sustaining community, most of Semigwalala's infrastructure, its pipes, its sewage, its electrical systems, are privately owned and managed. In addition to this, BC Housing oversees the maintenance and operation of its aging building stock, a cemetery, 1,800 unique trees, 15 commercial leases, and one of the most active film sites in the country. As caretakers of the lands, BC Housing has 23 full-time staff dedicated to its management, maintenance, and operation, And at any given time, we have 2 security guards on patrol 24/7. The site's annual operating expenses, which keep the lights on, the grass cut, and the heat running, are offset by our annual film and rental revenues. Semikawala is known to have as one of the most unique and celebrated tree collections in the country. However, it's important to remember that the site's beautiful landscape is itself the result of change. When the lands were purchased by the province in 1904, significant logging and regrading occurred to create the terracing that we see on site today. The site's current tree collection is predominantly comprised of unique species from Europe and Asia. Less than 35% of the collection originates from North America. Since taking custody of the lands, BC Housing has mapped and assessed all 1,800 trees on site, mapped the site's 5 watercourses, conducted habitat restoration at Davidson Creek, and planted 99 new trees. You're welcome to view an interactive survey of the tree collection on our website. The site's development as a self-sustaining community has left behind a network of over 100 kilometers of private infrastructure. This includes water, storm, sewage, electricity, steam systems, now entirely managed by BC Housing. Many of these systems are in critical condition. Infrastructure in the north end of site was in such poor condition that it had to be entirely replaced to provide modernized service to the 2 new health developments. Infrastructure in the south end of the site has been reviewed and assessed, and 1/5 of it is considered to be operating at critical or failing condition. The image of a wooden stave pipe found on the left-hand side of the screen is real. That was the condition of an old stormwater main we dug up near Davidson Creek. The site's boiler house is said to be one of the first and oldest district energy systems in the province. The equipment inside it is so old that of its 3 boilers, we utilize 1 solely for parts. 2 regional pieces of infrastructure run through the site, a water and sewer main that serves the larger Metro Vancouver community. The number 169 community bus provides frequent service through the site between Braid and Coquitlam Central SkyTrain stations. Low Heat Highway bounds the site's eastern edge. BC Housing recently undertook a series of improvements here in the spring of 2018, as well as completing a new multi-use path in the north end of site. The path provides a dedicated active transportation connection to Coquitlam Centre. Lastly, the Port of Metro Vancouver is currently proposing a new grade-separated overpass at Low Heat Highway and Pitt River Road to create efficiencies in CP's rail network. Since time immemorial, Semikawala has played an important role for Coquitlam First Nation. The bull identified on the slide on the left-hand side of your screen has been carbon dated to over 3,500 years old. Now we can only imagine what the site looked like at this time. However, we can be sure that it looked starkly different to today's altered landscape. The site's operation as the province's psychiatric institution for over a century is well evidenced by a number of significant buildings on site. These buildings are equally reflective of the mental health care philosophies of their era. Riverview's Big 5 collection of lawn and crease buildings represent institutional approaches to mental health care. These architecturally striking buildings were designed with lawn corridors, isolation rooms, and ward accommodations. A cemetery was operational on site for over 54 years and is the final resting place for over 1,000 Riverview Hospital patients. The site's evolution also speaks to what has already changed. The Boys Industrial School, which used to be located in the north end of site, include an auditorium and a pool that is no longer there. The same area was redeveloped as the home for the aged in the 1930s, and again as Valley View 300 in the 1950s. The site's design as a self-sustaining community included significant farming functions. Most related farming structures are long since gone as operations widened down in the 1980s. However, we know from excavations on site that we've come across animal bone fragments and foundations of an old blacksmith shop. And then there's Riverview's less tangible, but equally important history. For over 40 years, the site was home to the province's School of Psychiatric Nursing until it moved to BCIT in 1973. In 1994, Riverview was the first psychiatric institution in the province to adopt a Charter of Patient Rights. While Riverview Hospital officially closed in 2012, the site has continued to be a place of provincial and regional mental health treatment. Most of the province's most acute mental health facilities are still located on site. Since the hospital's closure, 289 beds have been created in modernized, purpose-built facilities operated by provincial and regional and nonprofit partners. Most recently, 2 new buildings were announced through the visioning process. Healing Spirit House, which opened in 2019 and provides services for youth with mental health needs and developmentally disabled adults. And Redfish Healing Center, which will open later this year and provide services for adults with concurrent mental health and addiction disorders. Mental health services on site represent a philosophical change in care delivery. Most mental health care delivery on site today is in new modernized facilities that are smaller in setting and provide greater autonomy and privacy for their clients. Through BC Housing's management of the lands, a series of significant investments have been made. New civil infrastructure has been created in the north end. All 3 of the site's sewage pump stations have been retrofitted. Contaminated soils and hazardous materials have been remediated and removed. New public realm features represent Coquitlam basket weave, as seen in the photo displayed here in the sidewalk. Building condition assessments have been conducted of all accessible buildings on site. A number of buildings have been re-roofed and repaired. 15 pieces of original First Nation artwork wrap utility boxes. And the condition of the site's tree collection has been assessed and a new maintenance plan is underway. Last but not least, a new electrical distribution system has been installed and modernized power is finally available on site. So where does that take us to now? We know that the status quo is no longer an option. To defer decisions and planning processes leads to further decay in the site's buildings and landscape and constrains our future decision-making potential. Financially, it is not feasible to continue operating the site as is. Significant investments are needed well above and beyond our ability to recuperate costs through existing site revenues. We need a plan to guide future investments and decision-making. So that takes us to our planning process. Many of you were probably involved in BC Housing's visioning process. This occurred from 2013 to 2015. Through this process, we met with thousands of individuals who were engaged in open houses, surveys, artist workshops, and stakeholder meetings. The vision document summarized the engagement outcomes and identified 5 themes for its redevelopment. It is important to note that the vision was not a redevelopment plan. While it set out themes for the site's future, it did not propose specific plans identifying land uses, densities, building forms, parks, open spaces, or buildings to be saved. That is our next phase of work. So in our next phase of work, we're looking to create a comprehensive community plan. This plan will include an identification of land uses. It could be residential, commercial, educational, health, institutional uses, densities, including built form, heights, building footprints, typologies, housing mixes, which could include market leases, nonprofit, co-ops, affordable housing, supportive housing, affordable home ownership, open spaces, the creation of parks, cemeteries, community gardens, ecological areas, a heritage strategy that is respectful of the site's buildings and archaeological history, transportation strategy that identifies ways of moving through the site, including cycling, pedestrian, transit, and vehicular connections, civil infrastructure servicing, how all of these different developments will be supported underground, an amenity strategy, including recreational facilities, artwork, cultural spaces, as well as the financial feasibility of it all. For those of you that took part in the visioning process, you'll recall that at the time of the site's transfer, BC Housing was provided with a break-even mandate. This mandate required site redevelopment costs to be fully offset by its development revenues. These were primarily anticipated to be from market residential sales. Government has since provided a new mandate to guide the planning process. The new mandate sets out that other than potential land transfers with Coquitlam First Nation, Semiqua is to be retained in public ownership. Under this mandate, development is anticipated to proceed through land leases, and site redevelopment costs are to be funded from these revenues. Expanding on the themes identified through the vision, government has established 5 principles to guide its planning process. First and foremost is our reconciliation-based partnership with Coquitlam First Nation. Secondly, the creation of an integrated community of mental health excellence, and the engagement with the site's pre- and post-colonial histories, protection and enhancement of the site's ecology, and the creation of safe, affordable, and functional housing. The multi-year planning process is anticipated to take shape over a number of stages. This next year will focus on establishing engagement processes and generating new ideas. Following that, a number of concept options will be explored. These could include a variety of approaches to building retention and landscape design. A preferred concept will then be identified and refined before folding into a city neighborhood process. Concurrent to this work will be constant and iterative engagement with the public. So who takes part in this process? In short, all of you. I think I said at the start that there were over 150 of you, and right now there's over 210. We're interested to hear from everyone, whether you're an advocacy or a service organization, maybe you're a neighbor, you're a local business owner, perhaps you work in the film industry, or you're an individual with lived experience with a mental illness. We want to hear from all of you. Our government counterparts at the municipal, regional, and provincial levels will all be consulted in providing input into the future of this important site. Coquitlam First Nation and BC Housing are determining a future for the lands in total partnership. KFN will concurrently be engaging with their own nation membership in the same process. Semikawala presents a fantastic and complex opportunity. To move forward, we have developed some draft goals of the site's redevelopment potential. These goals are a starting point, and subsequent to this event, you will be invited to provide your feedback through an online survey. I'll go through each goal now and invite you to take part in the survey afterwards. In relation to landscape, we aim to nurture a regenerative environment that balances the site's unique cultural landscape with its natural ecological features. In relation to buildings, we seek to design a diversity of visually interesting, appropriately scaled, and public spaces that respond to the unique use and site context. In relation to memory, we want to acknowledge and memorialize the site's pre- and contact history to inform the evolution of its iconic buildings, landscapes, and stories. In relation to housing, we wish to deliver a wide range of housing options that support diversity, inclusivity, and address the regional housing crisis. In relation to community, we want to create a complete and inclusive community that enables residents to thrive. In relation to mobility, we aim to provide an equitable mobility network that empowers residents and supports alternative modes of movement to and from the Semikawala LSA. In relation to wellness, we seek to embrace the community as a resource to support wellness and set a new standard for mental health integration. And last but not least, in relation to sustainability, we wish to establish a low-impact, ecologically sustainable community that is resilient to climate change, market forces, social stressors, and technological disruptors. So how can you get involved? The comprehensive community planning process will include a series of opportunities for public input and a full spectrum of involvement. Public engagement opportunities will range in levels of collaboration. At the highest level of involvement, we're looking to establish a public advisory group, or a PAG. This group will be made up of organizations and community members, representative of Semikawala's many development opportunities, the petals that I just went through. We'll also be holding focused discussions through themed stakeholder workshops with active service providers and advocates. It would be impossible to create a plan for the site's redevelopment without hearing from those with lived experience. In honoring the philosophy, nothing about me without me, we will be reaching out to local mental health service providers to hear from their clients living with a mental illness. These individuals will provide critical input into the development of an inclusive and integrated community. COVID permitting, in the future, we wish to hold some grassroots opportunities on site. Until then, we will continue to utilize our Let's Talk website to provide digital opportunities for online engagement. And last but not least, we'll be hosting 3 community information sessions over the course of the next few years. These events, which would otherwise typically follow an open house format, will be broadly advertised and provide a high level of updates at key milestones through the planning process. We welcome you to join the PEG. Applications can be made online. They're on our project website or in our digital Let's Talk platform. In terms of reference and application form is now posted and is available for applications until April 23rd. Now we'll move on to some questions. We have Rob Bars with us. Rob is a principal with Modus Planning and Engagement, which is one of our lead consultants in our planning process. And I welcome Rob to invite some questions that we've received.
Great, thank you, Lauren, and good evening, everybody. Just so you know, there is a Q&A panel down in the bottom right of your screen. And so if you click on that, you can enter questions. And many people have already done that, which is great. You can also upvote the questions. So if you click the little thumb symbol, you will basically be casting a vote for that question, and it will rise to the top of the list. So as I mentioned, we already have some really good questions. The first one is around the public process, Lauren, and there's a request for how will public input be used, and can there be some reassurance that that public input and stakeholder input will be considered and used during the planning process?
Yeah, absolutely. Public input is a critical part of every planning process. And we've been very deliberate and I hope thoughtful in terms of creating a series of opportunities. We recognize that there's some individuals that want to be at the drawing table with us and providing, their pencils and their concepts, and that there's other individuals that, perhaps are only available to come once a year. So we've tried to create that full spectrum of opportunity and are committed to hearing from individuals through that process. We're providing a strong commitment in terms of our time, as well as our facilitation of that process, because we do sincerely want to hear from you.
Great, thank you. Can we talk a little bit about the conservation of buildings? You mentioned there's a lot of heritage, a very important heritage on the site, as well as more ancient memory from KFN's perspective. Can you talk about whether there is a plan or how we will develop the plan for conserving heritage on the site?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hugely complex issue, both from a technical perspective and a philosophical one. The technical response first. The buildings have to be in a shape that they can be reutilized. And we've seen that the worst thing you can do to a building is turn the lights off, turn the heat off, and lock it off and walk away. We've tried to conduct a strategic preventative maintenance in that regard. We made a significant investment in re-roofing large portions of Center and East Lawn to try to enable that building to be in a condition that could be rehabilitated when that decision is made in the future. From a philosophical perspective, identifying which buildings, what form, how much of them is saved is something that we're looking to establish through this process. We have a heritage consultant that we're working with who is an experienced architectural heritage consultant. His name is Don Lexton. And we'll be looking to collaborate with him in terms of creating a strategy for that is both respectful of the histories that those buildings hold and also of the future that they could contribute to.
Great. So there's a couple of interesting questions about how the future of the development will reflect the history and culture of the local First Nation. So apart from the name change, which has been announced and you mentioned today, how do you see the future of the site reflecting the Coquitlam First Nation? And maybe Chief Ed Hall would also like to weigh in on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to some initiatives that have been done to date. I should say first and foremost, this is not something that I can identify. It's something that I know must come from the nation and from its membership. And through our collaboration to date, we've found a number of opportunities to reflect the nation's culture history, artwork, in everything that we do. I had one slide that included a crosswalk, and that crosswalk, the patterning on it and the paint marks on it are reflective of traditional basket weave. That same basket weave is replicated in retaining walls that were built on site and stone pavers that face the retaining wall. There are guardrails on site that are to look like reeds that speak to the roosting grounds that the great blue heron used to occupy on the lands. There's new artwork on site, and that is reflective and frankly brightens up a lot of what would otherwise be pretty boring utility boxes. We worked with the nation to establish architectural design guidelines for the two new health developments, Healing Spirit House and Redfish Healing Center. And there were changes made through that design and construction process to be more respectful of the cultural history on the lands. That included the selection of more traditional and natural materials, the design of the entranceways to have posts on it to be reflective of traditional housing. And as well as, it changed in terms of the dialect and the language. Following the renaming of the lands, we're implementing a new wayfinding and signage strategy on site, and that will have both English and Hunkaminam names on it. So wherever possible, we're working with the nation to provide more culturally respectful and historical names for new buildings, hence the Healing Spirit House and Redfish Healing Center names. And we anticipate to do that through the site's redevelopment. So it will be not just in the physical representation of what you see on the lands, but also how you refer to it too. I don't know, Chief Hall, if there's anything else you wish to add in that regard.
Thanks, Lauren. I think you covered everything. I was thinking, I wonder if she's going to say this. Yep, she did. Yeah. I was thinking about all of the names, that are going to be around there, and obviously, the translations. I must advise the whole public too that are partaking in this, and anybody that they wish to speak to on their experience with this meeting tonight, is that not everything is going to have a translation from English into Hunkaminam, even though we have our very unique language dialect, which has 29 consonants and the same number of vowels. It's kind of a surprise, but yeah, I mean, you think about the people of more ancient times and whatnot too. We didn't really have so much of a big large vocabulary and all these different things that we get to know every day, that are part of construction and different things. But yeah, it's just all about the names, and I'm sure we'll probably be able to at some point share some of our traditions. I was part of a visioning process too that was close to about 2015 down here in the community at our community center hall, and I had a visionary of what kind of things I thought would be unique that would even change small little areas of the footprint there that could be just slotted right in, and they would show our ancient ways of cooking outside, this type of thing. So it'd be about sharing some of our long time practice traditions and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's and having talked to the younger people and the persons that run the Healing Spirit House there, there's other things there that we had spoken of in the last couple of years regarding some of the practices that they want to get into, and showing some of the youths that are coming through there, and how we could actually join up with them on that, and to sort of collaborate and run these types of traditional type practices on the grounds over there. And it's just things like that, and a recognition. Yeah, the artwork is just amazing. So when the public will get to see that, I've only seen pictures of some of the artwork that I know was going in. Earlier in the presentation video, it showed me standing beside a house post that's still under construction, but it's near its finishes now. And then that'll probably have a little bit of time, and it's going to be getting unveiled over there, and at the new building, and I can hardly wait. It's really exciting to think about that ahead of time, and just knowing that I know a couple of the artists that have done some amazing work there. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. There is a question about trees. Obviously, there are many trees on the site. The site is an arboretum, as you mentioned, Lauren, and I think you mentioned 1,800 trees. So there's a question about how, through this process, the trees will be protected, recognized, and how do we plan for the future of trees on the site?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a chance to read some of the background there. So we recently undertook, as I mentioned, a complete mapping and as well as a condition assessment of the site's 1,800 trees. In doing that, I believe that we had 4 professional arborists on site for about 3 weeks. The amount of detail and attention that is needed is pretty remarkable, and absolutely warranted. The condition of the trees will partly inform in terms of a strategy for their maintenance. And in the review of what we've identified so far, there's approximately 300 trees on site of the 1,800 that are either high risk, dead, or dying or in poor condition. That also means that there's 1,500 that are in good or excellent condition. So first, we're looking to understand, what exactly there is in the current stock of the trees in terms of their health, but also in terms of their makeup, and to understand exactly in the future of the development, what type of curation will there be. There's been one particular focus historically on site, like I said, of nearly 70% of the collection actually being non-Indigenous to the space. There is interest in increasing that ratio and to incorporating new species on site. But what that plan actually looks like, what that mix is something that we're looking to determine through this process. And we're certainly looking to engage with the public on. In terms of removals, any removal within the city of Coquitlam requires a tree permit. And that's mandated under the tree permit removal bylaw, which also dictates replacements too. So that's something that we've been working closely with the city's urban forestry department, should removals be required, in terms of collaborating with them on identifying an appropriate replacement and an appropriate mix to be able to move forward.
And can you just remind everybody, Lauren, of the where they can find the tree inventory?
Yes, it's on our website. It's a digital inventory for those of you that are familiar with GIS, Geographic Information Systems. It's based on that, and it's interactive, so you can click on the individual trees. They each have a tag number. It identifies the diameter, the critical root zone, I believe the age, as well as the crown size of every species on site.
Great, thank you. There's a question about proposed land transfers. In the introduction, you mentioned as the idea that the land would be held in public ownership except for potential land transfers. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The province has established a partnership with Coquitlam First Nation in recognizing their ancestral history on the lands, and as well as asserting them as our partner in terms of the future development and as well as decision making. Through that, we anticipate that there may be land transfers. We're not entirely sure how many, how much, or what form, or what locations. However, we rightfully recognize in a government-to-government relationship that we hold with the nation that they're rightfully so, expecting and will be provided transfers through that process. That's expected to be identified through the plan that we create. So right now, the idea is to create a plan for all 244 acres of the site. And through that process, we'll be working with Coquitlam First Nation to identify areas of interest for them. We know that there's certain areas of site that have different archaeological and cultural importance to the nation. that may be of more value to them than others. And that's what we'll be looking to establish and identify.
Great, thank you. So there's a question here, and this is maybe difficult to just read out here, but there's, in the introduction, you mentioned one of the principles is to create an integrated community of mental health excellence. And so there's a question here about just trying to understand exactly what that means. So is that about a vision for using the land to meet multiple agendas or an inclusive, complete community? Or is it more about a vision of primarily an intentional focus on meeting the needs of people with serious mental illness? So is it a more complete community with mental illness as part of it, or is it a real focus on serious mental illness for the future of the site?
I would say both. You know, and it's hard to exactly define, you know, in terms of where some of these definitions start and other ones end, right? There already is a number of facilities on site for individuals with a serious mental illness. And as I mentioned in the presentation, most of the province's actually most acute facilities are located on site. And the most acute of which is set to open this summer. So they're new facilities. They're anticipated to be there for a long time into the future. We know from our work within the housing that BC Housing does, within what we hear from a lot of our health partners, from our nonprofit partners, that the community itself is a place of healing, and that individuals benefit from being supported by the community that they are located in, that they live in, where they can find work, where they can find social networks, where they can make connections. And they also have the supports needed for them to thrive. That's what we're envisioning in terms of an integrated community, and expecting that to totally coexist with, let's say, the more acute supports and services that are already on site in terms of supporting those with a serious mental illness. So
there's a question about recognizing the value of parks and green space, trees and plants for well-being, and you did touch on kind of why the site can't be left as it is, essentially as a protected green space. Can you just remind us of why that is, and also maybe talk to the intent of retaining green space, trees and other forms of vegetation on the site?
Yeah, absolutely. To perhaps clarify, the site is not currently a park. Colony Farm Regional Park is a park, and at one point was part of the larger Riverview Hospital development. However, the site is privately managed under BC Housing's custody. We welcome public access to it. We do have, you know, hours of access to maintain safety on the lands for those who live there. And also it's individuals' homes. And that's something that we hold utmost respect for in terms of maintaining their privacy. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of research that I find particularly fascinating in terms of green spaces as healing spaces. And that is something certainly that we're very interested in terms of understanding how that can be integrated within a development, and what kind of spaces are exactly needed to produce that healing.
Thank you. There's a question about the form of buildings. One of them is, will high-rise development be prohibited? But maybe you could also talk, Lauren, about the general form of the buildings that we expect to see on the site, or how that will be determined.
Yeah, absolutely. In short answer, we do not have a development plan for the site that sets out typologies or concepts or heights. And that is what we're looking to create through this planning process. One of the draft goals was specifically in relation to buildings, and spoke about creating a form that was respectful of the site's history. What exactly that looks like and how it supports the future of the lands, we don't know. However, we're optimistic that there's a range of options within that that could be incorporated.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about seniors? Are the needs of seniors and seniors housing something that can be incorporated here, and how might be that achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. And in short, yes, this is something that I believe BC Housing has quite a bit of expertise in terms of supporting individuals in their housing needs. All across the spectrum, and especially at a senior level. So certainly we envision that as one of the housing forms that will be accommodated in the larger mix on site.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Great question here about memory. How do we honor the memory of those who suffered at Riverview and recognize the mixed legacy of the Riverview Hospital?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you so much for that. And it's something that, I struggle with, and I've spent quite a bit of time personally myself, just understanding exactly, these are contentious and hard histories to often face. Riverview Hospital, at its height, was a hugely innovative, and I would say kind of at its peak in terms of its approaches to mental health treatment. I'm optimistic in thinking that the intentions of the day were the best, and we know that we've learned from some of those approaches to mental health care, and a lot of them were not positive. And there's some unfortunate stories to be told there, and there has to be a way to be able to balance that, I think, with other histories of the site too. I think the way of going about that is to listen and to hear from individuals, which is why we've been so deliberate in establishing a lived experience group. We wish to go out and speak to individuals. We've tried to see if we could track down individuals that did actually live and access services at Riverview Hospital. Some of the nonprofit providers in the Tri-City region were actually established as a result of the closure of Riverview Hospital. So we're really intrigued to hear their perspective in terms of what the buildings and what the site, in terms of what is a pretty campus-like development, makes them feel, and how they envision a community that is integrated of their needs, what that looks like, and how that differs or perhaps looks like what the Riverview Hospital site used to look like. So I think it's only done through listening, and that's something that we have a big role to play in the upcoming years.
Great. Let's just take a slight change of tack here. Are there any streams or creeks on the site which have been covered over, and could these possibly be restored to their natural condition through a daylighting process?
Yeah, we hope so. And in fact, we've already done some restoration work on Davidson. Since BC Housing has been caretakers of the lands in 2015, we have not covered up any creeks. However, we know that there's a number of creeks that are culverted, and we know that these feed down to the Coquitlam River. So they have important waterways and paths in terms of ecologically sensitive areas, as well as areas that support the salmon habitat that Chief Hall spoke to. And those are things that we're really interested in terms of supporting. We've done mapping of the creeks on site. We have an ecologist and biologist that work with us, PGL, and they oversee any works in those areas. We go through the Water Sustainability Act permitting process to monitor any works that we conduct within the creek area. And certainly the intention is that through the site's development and growth and planning, that these places will only become more thriving environments for their species. In our exploration to date, we've identified that there's a lot of that habitat that is pretty hampered by invasive species. I feel like I have a personal battle with Japanese knotweed on site, which is just a real struggle for our operations and grounds crew to be able to manage, as well as some other Himalayan blackberry species that are very pervasive, and they completely hamper what would otherwise be a pretty thriving ecological environment and just completely consume them. So currently, we have annual management plans to be able to tackle those spaces. And like I said, the work that we did in Davidson Creek, I think, is just a small sliver of what could be done with the creeks elsewhere on site.
There's a question about using Riverview to house the homeless, including mini homes for the homeless on the site. So could you tell us, has this been considered, or will this be considered as part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very deliberate in terms of when I identified housing mixes, I said mixes, meaning that we anticipate there to be a broad spectrum in terms of individuals that could benefit from the housing on site. We call housing that supports individuals who are experiencing homelessness, we call that often supportive housing or transitional housing. And that is something that will be explored through the planning process. We know that housing is most successful when it's integrated within a community, and that's what we envision occurring through the redevelopment. That will be determined through consultation with our partner, Coquitlam First Nation, as well as in consultation with the public.
There's a couple of questions about how different stakeholders can be involved in the process, including the film industry or their representatives, and also commercial tenants on the site. Could you talk a little bit about how you anticipate those groups being involved going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to perhaps tout the site's horn a bit. There was an article at the start of this month that the site was the 3rd most filmed location in the province and the 4th most filmed location in Canada. Creative BC estimates that any film day in the province generates $250,000 of economic revenue. So, you know, we take that positioning in terms of the future of that economy on site very seriously. It's also, the film industry has been a fantastic partner in our management of the lands. I think the first building that they started utilizing was the Crease building in 1992. So they've literally been on site for decades. They've been on site in what I would say are pretty flexible formats, and something that we're keen to explore is a more permanent format. Whether that's something like a studio space or a film school itself, that could provide, you know, permanent uses forever into the future of the lands. That's something that we're very intrigued with speaking with folks in the industry about. So if that's you, please do reach out to us, as well as their potential rehabilitation of some of the buildings. It's tough to totally rehabilitate a building without having a user for it. And having a user for it helps us make, you know, strategic investment decisions in terms of what parts of it get repaired, knowing who the end space is going to benefit. And that's something that we're intrigued to hear from, you know, studio companies, production companies, in terms of their long-term interest in it. So we have certainly strong interest to engage with the film industry, and that's something that we'll be targeting, as well as, I would say more generically, the overall economic development of the site. Currently on site, there are, like I said, 15 commercial tenancies, most of which are actually government tenancies, some nonprofit providers also. But we're looking to seriously expand that in a really deliberate way to create that integrated community. We know that communities benefit when they have, you know, economic, environmental, and social supports within them. And the economic growth is something that we're interested to identify partners in terms of making use of those spaces that could be long-term at the table with us.
Great. So this one maybe for Chief Ed Hall. The question and comment is, the Indigenous design integration so far on the site looks amazing. Do we yet know what other opportunities there are to learn more about KFN and how that may be represented on the lands through the process or through the design? So Chief Hall, maybe you could talk about, will there be other opportunities to learn more about KFN's history and culture, do you think, through this process?
Thanks a lot, Rob, and to the person who posed the question. That's a very good question. I I've actually expressed it in some of my conversations in years past, the last 5-6 years. The types of things that I would like to see there, and I touched on it earlier with sharing the traditions of traditional type cooking outdoors. I have expressed to a couple of different ministers over a given time that I would like to probably see like an interpretive center, kind of like it's like maybe a little museum, that type of thing, because we have some of our eldest First Nation members that have like original dugout canoes that goes back to the early 1900s. So they're hand dug out one-piece canoes, and so there's these types of things that would make an excellent display, and and something to tell about it, in like a small little museum type place. And also the Victoria Museum is they're wanting to repatriate all of everything that's been collected over the years there back to their respective First Nation communities, that'll be able to house them, put up the space for it and accommodate. And that's one of my goals too. And I've actually shared the idea with some big developers too, within the Tri-Cities, that if they come and have a conversation with us, I'd like to be able to try and implement these kinds of ideas into those conversations, when they're going to develop a site. But there's been only a few talks on that kind of thing. But it is my hopes to have something there close to home, and so we'll be able to have something on display. Probably have a hostess there to talk about it. There, it could be some audio type equipment there to go on to talk about it. There could, just different things, and activities, maybe an activity center / display, kind of a thing. These are some of the ideas that I've thought of to try and share some of our traditions and ways and everything that have been key throughout the region for like way back when. And once upon a time, the area here used to have a big house, a traditional longhouse. And I hope to be able to see something like that there, which it'll be able to be open to everybody to go and have a look and learn about the Coquitlam. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There's a question about, this is an important one, Lauren, maybe you could talk about what is the partnership between BC Housing and Ministry of Health look like on the site, maybe currently, and how you see that operating going forward?
Yeah, and I would maybe add to that too, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions too, which is relatively new within the past 4 years. So BC Housing is a Crown corporation that currently sits under the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing. However, through that, we have close collaboration with PHSA, BC Mental Health Substance Use Services, as well as the Regional Health Authority, Fraser Health. We work with them currently at a very close relationship as their tenants on the lands, and we envision them as a key part in terms of the future of the development. In terms of a policy and government funding level, that's something that is occurring through our ministries, and there's close collaboration in terms of the overall response to mental health and homelessness and addictions throughout the province, and ensuring that there's a coordinated provincial strategy to respond to that.
Question about the break-even mandate. Could you go over the break-even mandate and how it's changed, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the lands were transferred in 2015, and also when BC Housing was provided the direction to initiate the planning of the site, which occurred in 2012, 2013, following the hospital's closure, it was provided with a break-even mandate. And the mandate said that any redevelopment that is to occur on the lands was to be fully offset by development revenues generated from it. That is no longer the mandate. That is no longer the sole driving factor in terms of the development of a future plan for the site. Government has established that the lands are to be maintained in public ownership with the belief that public assets are to be maintained within public hands. Of course, as I said, with the exception being with any transfers to Coquitlam First Nation as our partner. However, the driver of that process is no longer the break-even focus.
Great, thank you. Are you planning for any retail development on the site, or is that known yet?
It's not known yet, but it's fully anticipated. Any retail is an important part of any community in terms of supporting individuals on site, supporting their daily needs, providing employment opportunities, economic development, job growth, etc. Also, as probably many folks who are tenants on site will tell you, it's a long way to go get lunch. And in creating a community that supports itself, those types of services are absolutely critical and something that we definitely welcome in terms of the future.
Question about, are we planning innovation in buildings on the site? So I assume like building design and construction. Would that be part of the goal here?
Yeah, absolutely. BC Housing actually has a research branch, and this is something that we take part at a government level in terms of establishing new code guidelines, new clean building technology. We were actually at the forefront in terms of the use of modular housing and the creation of new affordable housing designs that were completely compliant with Passive House, which we have a number of developments now across the province which achieve. So absolutely. It's also many of, I believe, the heritage buildings are going to drive some innovation and probably some innovation that we're not entirely aware of quite yet. But we know that there needs to be creative approaches in terms of how they can be adapted and how they can be reused. And we're looking to work with our excellent design team in terms of coming up with those solutions and thinking about what kind of sustainable technologies we can apply in doing that.
There's a couple of comments which I just want to read out, and maybe you want to react to it. But there's a comment about the value of trees, even those that are dead and dying, as wildlife trees, for cavities for birds, bats, other wildlife species. Snags are important. So I think it's just an important thing to note that, even dead and dying trees can provide some value.
Maybe, Rob, if I can just add to that, in the habitat restoration that was done in Davidson Creek, that was actually purposely done. Which full disclosure, I'm not an ecologist, I'm not a biologist. We have a fantastic team that is, but they educated me through that process in terms of those are critical parts of that habitat, and that's needed to be able to allow those spaces to thrive. So actual dead trees from the site were utilized to create new habitat and hopefully new growth.
Great. What's going to happen to the cemetery that's on site?
Yeah. Cemeteries in BC are protected. There's provincial legislation. I believe it's called the BC Cemetery Funerals and Interment Act that outlines their protection. We have a Consumer Protection BC license for the cemetery that outlines our operation of it. We do not permit interments at this time. But in terms of its future use, it's certainly a space that we anticipate seeing as an open space. And whether or not perhaps that gets complemented by the site's archaeological history, which we believe that there's some potential there for it. We're not sure, but it's definitely a space that we anticipate seeing as a future green space.
There's a question about decision-making here. Who has the final say about what happens to Riverview? So maybe you could talk about the approvals process and the decision-making process that is likely to have gone through as part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. The province through BC Housing has signed a partnership agreement with Coquitlam First Nation. And this partnership recognizes, as I've mentioned, their ancestral history of the lands, and as well as recognizing the nation in terms of determining a future for it too. So through this partnership agreement, we've identified that we will not be advancing any approvals without the nation's support, and everything that we will do on the lands will be in total collaboration with them. So that is outlining our current process to date. Part of that is exactly what we're embarking on right now, is the engagement process, as well as what we anticipate to be a municipal process in the future in terms of going through an OCP amendment process and a neighborhood plan process, and ultimately a rezoning.
With the city of Coquitlam.
Yeah.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about public access? There's a couple of questions here about to what extent is there public access now? There was also a question about increased security, which I think you mentioned. And then what would be the plan for public access in the future, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I always welcome individuals to the site. I grew up in the Lower Mainland, and there's many individuals that I think are probably from my era and prior to that thought that it was a place that they couldn't access. And nothing is further from the truth. It does have hours of access, which are 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And those are largely in the summertime hours, supposed to reflect daylight hours. But we welcome individuals, and it is a very, very popular place in the summertime for dog walking, picnics, watch kids learn how to ride their bike. In the wintertime, I think it might be one of the Tri-Cities' most popular tobogganing spots. Its terracing landscape provides for that. So certainly public access is welcome. There are individuals living on site today, and we ask that their privacy is respected. Also, the film industry is often highly protective and secretive in terms of what they're doing. And that is, of course, to protect their own industry, and also to ensure that their sets are not crowded with media or paparazzi or individuals invading and disrupting the space. So you're welcome to the site. We ask that you keep a distance of all tenanted buildings, as well as any area that you see under filming. Recently, we changed actually our photography rules, where we do allow personal photography on the lands, but no professional photography. So if you are seeking to do a photo shoot or anything commercial in nature, we do ask that you follow our special event permit process. And that's really set out to ensure the safety of others and also yourselves. The site is a really dynamic, active place, and it is not somewhere that when you walk onto, you may be familiar with what's occurring elsewhere. So we require individuals in taking part in organized activities to have the proper insurances in place. We have a liaison system that supports directing them, and any spaces that they've leased or had under license ensures that they're the only ones that have access to it. And also supports their general access overall to the lands.
There's a question here about can this be a campus for mental health? So I'll read the whole question because it's interesting, I think. So considering the dire shortage of healthcare professionals in the province and country, is the creation of a campus for mental health a possibility for the use of the lands?
Interesting. I'd be interested to learn more exactly what is meant by a campus of mental health. Because I'm not sure I'm understanding the terminology of campus exactly, and how individuals in the healthcare profession, can exactly be supported through that. I see the benefits in creation of any complete community as something that anyone can benefit from. And that's certainly something that we hope that healthcare professionals are able to be part of. We also know that there's a keen interest for individuals to live close to their workspaces, and through the housing continuum and spectrum that will be created on site, we hope that we can increase opportunities for that.
I think one way to interpret the question might be around mental health training campus. So actual training for professionals.
As an educational facility.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, sorry, thank you. In the new Redfish Healing Center building, actually, the way that they've designed that space is for them to have an entire front entryway that is basically going to have a partial auditorium. So the concept of having opportunities for learning on site, and to have really what was Riverview Hospital's legacy of excellence in terms of education and training continue is already being integrated and implemented. In terms of finding large-scale users for some of the buildings on the lands, something that we've certainly caught our interest is potential educational partners. Whether that's post-secondary institutions or technical training facilities and providers, but being able to have permanent spaces for them on the lands. And we know that there's a direct correlation in terms of the site's medical history and whether that's something that they would be interested in terms of permanently being located on.
Great. So maybe time for just a couple more questions here. What type of population growth are we expecting? So I guess the question is, what kind of scale of development is anticipated here?
In terms of the density, the volumes, the numbers, the housing units, I do not have an answer on that, and that is something that we're looking to identify through this process. Other than to say that we're looking for it to obviously, increase in terms of the number of individuals that it can support.
Okay, I think maybe we'll just finish with an observation, and I just want to make sure I find the question / comment here, and maybe it's something for Chief Ed Hall just to comment on. Carrie says, not a question, but I saw a great blue heron standing on the north end of the ball field near the busy Lougheed Highway about 8:15 on March 14th. I couldn't believe my eyes because I'd never seen any herons ever, let alone such a huge heron on the site. I chose to make it mean the property is going to be okay. I've come to love it deeply through nearly daily walks through the pandemic. And yeah, interesting that maybe people are starting to see great blue herons. Now it's been named the place of the great blue heron, or Semiquela. Chief Ed Hall, maybe just a comment to finish.
I don't know if
my video hasn't come back on. Okay.
That's okay. We can hear you, so that's great.
Okay.
There you go.
I would have to say that was very, very well timed on our feathered friend there, the heron. They are a beautiful bird. There has been rookeries around here in the last handful of years. More recently behind our Elders multiplex, and also across at the Wilson Farms near Shaughnessy. They kind of move around a bit, but that one's a really well trained friend of mine, and shows up just at the most opportune times. All kidding aside, no, that's a great sighting. Kudos to the person that spotted that one. We don't see them around here. At certain hours, and that too. They're really fun to watch. Actually, they're so such a stealth, beautiful creature, and to have one in the field there, well, then they must know that there's things that are starting to come out of hibernation, and that's their opportune time to go for what they like to have. So it's very good sighting to you that saw that one.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our time. We've got through a lot of the questions online. We are going to try and answer the rest of them that we didn't get to today, and write up the answers on the website in the next few days. So we will try and address all of your questions at some point, but I'll just say thank you very much for the great questions, and to Lauren and Chief Hall for attempting to answer those. Thank you. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Rob. And we just have a closing slide. Thank you, everyone, so much for taking part in this evening's session. We do hope and wish to soon be together in person, but until then, we will follow the provincial health orders and all maintain our distance, and are appreciative that we have the technology of today to be able to enable us to take part. In closing, I just wanted to share some directions in terms of where you can go to for further information, and also welcome your input. So please visit our Let's Talk page. Our Let's Talk page is our digital engagement platform. This can be found at letstalkhousingbc.ca/Samiqua-Alla Riverview. You can also go onto our project website. Both of these pages have the online digital application for the PEG. And you'll also be sent out a survey, and we're looking for your input in terms of the goals that were identified through this process. Like I mentioned, these are starting points, and we're intrigued to hear from you in terms of your thoughts about it, and we'll be revising the goals accordingly. Later this year, we're looking to host a second community information session, a CIS, sometime in late 2021. And lastly, we just encourage you to check out our project website. As Chief Hall spoke to, we have an audio clip online. You can practice your saying of Samiqua-Alla and learn some Hunkaminam. And we also post regular site updates, any activity that's happening on the lands. We have a generic email there that we welcome inquiries through. And in general, just look to share any updates of activity that's occurring on site. So thank you again. We got up to over 200 individuals that joined us, and we really appreciate your enthusiasm, your passion, and we look forward to working with you further. Thank you, Chief Hall.
Aitznet, Aiquanant, Quitsnamatsense. Good evening, good night. See you all soon. Take care and be safe. Isapka. Thank you all.